Hey fellow enthusiasts, a few weeks ago on Wide Open Throttle, we did a Q&A episode with a bunch of our hosts. However, a few of our veteran journalists were off on assignment. Well, today I have wrangled them all together so that you can get to know them better.
My daily driver is a Volvo company car. It's a 2011 S60 T6. It's 300 horse turbo, all-wheel drive. It has an adjustable electronic suspension. It's a pretty sporty car. I love it. I put almost 50,000 miles on it in 2 years.
I don't actually have a daily driver. I haven't had one for probably 25 years. That's because luckily I get to drive press cars all the time, and I've probably driven thousands over the years. What cars I own? Well, I've got a 2010 Golf GTI that Mrs. MacKenzie runs around in, and back in Australia I still have a 1967 Alfa Romeo GTB.
I don't have a single daily driver because I've got something like 24 cars and maybe 10 of them run. I drive a Jeep Grand Cherokee a lot, which is kind of embarrassing, but I also have a 73 Suburban, a 66 Buick. Occasionally I'll drive one of my older muscle cars. I have a 79 Camaro, stuff like that.
Well, these days I'm the custodian of our 2012 Car of the Year, Volkswagen Passat SEL. Mostly I drive press cars every day, but the household does have a 2005 Acura TL.
What's today, Monday? This, Aston Martin Vanquish. You know, it's funny, man. The last car I bought was a Subaru WRX wagon, 2006. And from the day I started at MotorTrend till today, which is more than 2.5 years later, I've driven it exactly once.
I like the what's the top speed that you've run question because I usually win. This could be egomaniacal, but I actually think that I'm the fastest car magazine editor. There might have been somebody who did something that I don't know about, but I definitely am at Hot Rod because my number is 261 miles an hour. Me and a friend, Keith Turk, and his wife, Tanya, run an 81 Camaro at the Bonneville Salt Flats, and I've been over 2.25 in that thing a couple dozen times and hold several land speed records.
I've always liked going to Germany because you can really give a car a good run on the road, and so I've been fortunate to have hit 200 miles an hour a couple of times, most memorably in the Corvette ZR1 with Justin Bell.
180, 195, 6, 7, 8, 9, that's 200 miles an hour, you bastard!
There's nothing like speed. It's the only truly 20th century vice, I think. That Corvette trip was memorable too because I managed to equal my fastest ever average speed for 50 miles into Munich on the day before. I'd averaged 132 miles an hour for 50 miles. That's my all-time record.
You know, the fastest I've ever gone, I don't know the actual speed, but I was in an old stock car. It was like a 90s Dodge something or other, but it was an old stock car. We were at the California Speedway, and I probably got over 180, something like that. When they put me in the passenger seat, he went over 200. And so that was pretty fast.
Well, we didn't have any GPS confirmation, but the indicated speed was 200 miles an hour, and it was in a Lamborghini Aventador, a prototype, an early design build car with wipers that weren't working and were creeping up from the air pressure at Nardo at the big circular race or test track in Italy.
27 years of racing, and my best speed is in a Mustang street car at a MotorTrend top speed test just this summer. We ran the Mustang Shelby GT500 to see if it really would go 200 at a test track in Arizona. And it's one of the most frightening things I've ever done. And it wasn't the 200 miles an hour. The Mustang was perfectly stable. It was trying to get off the banking as fast as possible because that 1.25 miles straight in between the banked corners on this test track was not long enough. The car was still accelerating, and we got to almost 197 miles an hour.
I can't remember a time when I wasn't fascinated about cars. My earliest memories. I just always loved cars. I can't explain it. I don't know why.
I think my car love was in utero. From the earliest day, my parents say car was my first word, and I always identified my parents' friends by the cars they drove. And I began my car evaluation career in about nursery school when I used to beg for rides home from Sunday school with anybody who had just bought a new car.
My dad was into English cars, which I was never into, but he did have one 48 Ford that I remember helping him change the bearings lying underneath the car. And so between my buddies in high school, my dad, and my interest in those car magazines, honestly, I've never even had a job that didn't have to do with cars.
My mama used to say I was born with a toy car in my hand. I loved cars since I was a little boy. And in terms of racing, I never really dreamed or thought about racing. It was just so far away. My dad bought me a mini bike, and first thing I ever drove was a snowmobile when we lived up in New York. And the racing started for me with autocross. When I stumbled on autocross, I made my first run. I said, this is for me.
Well, love of cars. I mean, like a lot of people, my father sort of raised me to be a gearhead. The rumor is that he had a Datsun 280Z, and when I was 1 year old and just learned how to walk, I somehow got a hold of a can of house paint, and he had not quite this orange, it was more of a copper, but I put a white racing stripe down the side of his car. But I mean, my earliest memories with my dad, or I was strapped into the front of that Z and we were running around the canyons around Malibu, where we actually test a lot of cars for MotorTrend today. So it's just always been something, I don't know, just been beaten into me, not beaten, but instilled into me.
A lot of people ask me how I get this job, and honestly, I can't really say. I kind of lucked into it. I left high school and went into the military for a year. I then worked for a company that made steel tubing, of all things. I spent 6 years working in a bank. But when my first son was born, I decided I'd had to sell my rally car and buy a house, and I wanted to keep involved with cars. So I started writing for car clubs, car club magazines. I then started doing freelance motorsport, and one thing led to another, and by 1985 I had a full-time job on a car magazine in Melbourne, Australia. It's a job that's since taken me all around the world, and I'm very, very fortunate.
How I got my job is actually a pretty good story. And unfortunately, it goes way back. I started working at a Dodge dealership immediately after high school, like literally the Monday after I graduated. And while I was there, I noticed an ad in CarCraft magazine that they were looking for somebody, and I went down and I had an interview with Jeff Smith, who was the editor at the time, and he basically said, okay kid, go away, come back when you've got some experience. And I did that. I went and worked for a couple of other automotive companies, and at one of them, I got to know a lot of the editors at the magazines, and so I found out that Hot Rod had an opening in 1991. And I went back and I had another interview with Jeff Smith, who was the editor of Hot Rod at that time, and did a couple freelance stories for him. And I remember sitting there when he said, how'd you like to work for Hot Rod magazine?
I started out in autocross, racing pylons when I was 19 years old, and I got my first connections there for tire sponsorships, and then I got a job putting on an autocross. It was the National Collegiate Driving Championships for Dodge, and saved all my money for 2 years. Started racing in the Volkswagen Cup and just hung on from there. All these years, it's been 27 years, I think, next year.
The phone rang one day, and I got the job offer to switch from another magazine to MotorTrend, but my way into the car magazine business back in the day was I just happened to know someone who worked at another magazine, and a job opening came up, and he tipped me off to it, and I went for it.
What's fun about MotorTrend is not just the cars, because a lot of places get cool cars, but we get to go and take them places. As hopefully you guys have watched, I drove the 1 millionth Land Rover Discovery onto Red Square in Moscow. Got to run around Scotland in Bentleys for a week. I get to spend a lot of time on a lot of racetracks. Good racetracks too, like the Nürburgring, Spa, plus Laguna Seca, and others around the country. So yeah, I guess travel is probably my favorite other part of the job.
Aside from getting to drive a whole bunch of cool cars, the neat thing about working with Hot Rod is that you really are working in your hobby. And that has some downsides, of course. There comes a point where I never want to go to another car show the rest of my life. I never want to turn another wrench. But then you realize, you know what, this is not like working. And that's what happens when you forget to turn the launch control on. I've gotten to meet a lot of my heroes. I remember the first guy when I started Hot Rod in '91, who I got to go do a story with, was Dick Landy, who was a really famous Mopar drag racer in the 60s. And from then on, I've really gotten to deal with the greats.
I enjoy the way the MotorTrend staff deals in reality. There's so much BS in the world, and I like the way these guys tell it like it is. And you know, we test a car and put down what it does, and that's what they publicize, and they put down their opinions. And in today's world, in today's media, there's not enough of that, not enough reality.
When I came here 8 years ago, it was to run a magazine. Now MotorTrend is an automotive media brand, has a highly successful website, iPhone apps, it has digital magazines, and of course, the YouTube channel. And the best thing about all of that has been to build a team of people who are really, really good at what they do. It's one of the youngest teams in the business. It's very, very hungry and very, very committed. And that to me is the best thing about working here, the people.
We hope you enjoyed learning more about a few of our veteran journalists. Be sure to stay tuned next week for our coverage of the Detroit Auto Show.